Chapter 96. Hero defeated by a penny. Feeling before the entire city was locked down for a thorough search, Shilian and company traveled through the night and arrived at another city. Shilian once again seated the king and queen in a safe hideout, and then he and Fangshan went out to earn money. However, those who couldn't earn much in the city wouldn't magically be luckier in a new one. Like always, they worked a full day's labor for a meager pay, but the once inseparable trio were now suddenly missing one member, and the remaining two were having a hard time getting used to it. Mu Ching had always been responsible for looking after the money purse, and he had constantly kept track of their finances. Now that Mu Ching had left, Shilian had no choice but to keep the money on himself, as Fangshan admitted up front that he might lose it by accident. Every time he counted that sad bit of money, he really couldn't believe it was all he'd earned for the hard day's labor. In his old life, he'd given alms to beggars that were more than this. With Mu Ching gone, they had also lost the one who brought food to the king and queen, so Shilian had to personally deliver all sorts of daily necessities to their hiding place. So Shilian had to personally deliver all sorts of daily necessities to their hiding place with the help of Fangshan. The queen was very happy that she got to see her son frequently, and when she was happy, she cooked. That day, she dragged Shilian and Fangshan to the table to try her soup. "You both need to fatten up. Look at how thin you've become." Fangshan was streaming cold sweat, and he bounced back to his feet the moment his butt touched the bench. He waved both hands and assured her, No, Your Majesty. Your humble servant Fangshan doesn't care. I absolutely mustn't." "What's there to be afraid of, child?" the queen chided pleasantly. "Come sit down." How could Fangshan tell her? He simply didn't dare. The queen delivered the fruits of her labor after he forced himself to sit down. Shilian sat at the head of the table, and Fangshan took a sharp breath before removing the pot cover. When the two of them saw what was in the pot, their expressions turned ghastly. "This chicken died a tragic death," Shilian said under his breath. Fangshan's lips trembled. "Your Highness, you didn't see right. There's no chicken in this." Shilian was flummoxed. "Then what's the thing floating in there that looks like a dead chicken?" "I think it's thick soup, but the shape of it's a little off," Fangshan replied. The two spent a long time studying the pot's contents and couldn't figure it out. The queen ladled a full bowl for Shilian, and Fangshan hurried to serve himself. When the queen went to the back of the cottage to find the king, they instantly dumped the soup from their bowls and pretended to wipe their mouths, looking as if they had slurped it down in a gulp and enjoyed it so much that they couldn't get enough. I'm full. The queen was delighted at the sight. "Was it good?" It was. Shilian praised hollowly. "If it was good, then have some more," the queen said happily. Shilian almost sputtered a mouthful of soup he hadn't eaten, and raised his handkerchief to pretend he was wiping his lips. The queen seemed to hesitate before she said, "My son, I want to ask you a question. Please don't blame your mom for being nosy." Shilian stiffened and placed the handkerchief down. "What is it? Please ask." The queen sat down next to him. "Where is that child Mu Ching? Why hasn't he stopped in the past few days?" He knew it. Shilian's heart squeezed tighter at the mention of Mu Ching. "Oh, I gave him some tasks to do, so he's off elsewhere." The queen seemed to breathe a sigh of relief and gave him a nod. "When will he be back?" "He may need to be gone for a long time. He won't be back anytime soon," Shilian replied. The queen seemed troubled by this news, and Shilian noticed. "Is there something the matter?" "Oh, it's nothing," the queen instantly replied. Fangshan had a sharper eye, and he spoke up. "Your Majesty, what's wrong with your hands?" "Hands?" Shilian looked and was shocked at the sight. His mother's delicate, exquisitely maintained upper-class hands looked awful. They were scraped and peeling at the knuckles with faint traces of blood. Shilian stood up abruptly and grabbed her hands. "What's going on?" "It's nothing. I just washed some clothes and blankets, but I'm not very good at it," the queen quickly explained. Why are you doing the washing yourself?" Shilian blurted. "You could have..." But he didn't know how to finish the sentence. Could have what? Could have had the palace attendants do the washing? Could have had Mu Ching do the washing? None of that was possible now. Mu Ching had acted as a personal attendant on the never-ending road to escape. but his duties included taking care of all of the personal necessities, including caring for the needs of including caring for the needs of Shilian, the king, and the queen. With him gone, there was no one to attend to the mundane daily tasks. No one to cook, no one to wash, no one to fold the blankets. The simple days of the past suddenly became difficult. Shilian could endure it as there were far too many other things to worry about. But his mother had lived a comfortable, luxurious life. When had she ever performed such crude labor? But now how would it get done if the queen hadn't handled the work herself? After some silence, Shilian said, "Don't let this trouble you. I'll take care of the washing." The queen smiled. "No need. You just take care of yourself. I've never done laundry nor cooked before, but I have nothing but free time every day, and doing the chores myself is quite fun. Especially since you both enjoyed the meal. That makes me quite happy." The pot of soup had been stirred by his mother's battered hands, but they hadn't drunk a drop and poured it away on the sly. Shilian and Fengshen exchanged looks, and both felt rather horrid. Just then the queen said, "Oh yes, there was another thing. Is there any way you can bring some medicine back tomorrow?" Shilian's eyes widened slightly. "Medicine? What kind of medicine?" The queen's face was troubled, and she sighed. "I'm not quite sure. Why don't you go to the pharmacy and inquire about what kind of medicine should be taken when someone's coughing up blood?" "Coughing up blood?" Shilian was shocked. "Who's coughing up blood? You? Father? Why didn't you say something sooner?" He raised his voice, and the queen immediately hushed him. "Speak quietly." However, it was too late. An outraged voice came from the back of the cottage. "I told you not to run your mouth." It was the king. Now that he had already overheard them, the queen didn't worry about hushing anymore and called out towards the back room. "I won't do it if this keeps up." Shilian walked straight to the back room and saw the king huddled on a bed of ragged blankets. He hadn't seen his father closely in a while, and observing him now, he looked quite ill. His cheeks were sunken, and the ghastly gloom of the room had made him appear even more sickly. He had no royal aura at all. He was nothing more than a defeated, scruffy old man. Shilian didn't even need to check his pulse to know that he must have been ill for some time now, and that it was serious. The suffocating, musty air of the sickness permeated the entire room. Recalling that the queen had said one of his symptoms was coughing up blood, he raised his voice in distress. "What's going on here?" The king sealed his expression. "What's with the tone?" The queen and Fengshen entered the room as well. "Who cares what tone I'm using? Why didn't you say something sooner if you're sick?" Shilian admonished. "Are you lecturing your king?" he angrily replied. What your king does and does not say at any given time is not for you to dictate." He was still carrying on with that tough posture. Even now Shilian was in disbelief. "You're unbelievable. Are you still throwing your title's weight around at a time like this?" The king was outraged. "Get the hell out, now!" The queen and Fengshen immediately dragged Shilian out of the room, and the queen begged, "My son, don't be like this. He's your father, and he's ill. Take a step back." First on the run, and now there was an illness to manage. It was like adding ice to snow. Shilian buried his face in his hands. "Mother, why didn't either of you say anything sooner? If you had, the illness wouldn't have progressed to coughing up blood. Do you know how hard that is to cure?" In their current situation, it was impossible. The queen's reply was both dismayed and aggrieved. We didn't know that it'd worsen like this." Yeah, besides, we've been dodging Yong'an pursuit this entire way. There was no time to stop, Fengshen added. Shilian pulled his face from his hands. "I'll take him to a doctor in the city right now." "No need," the king shouted from within the room. Shilian looked back and was about to rebuke him with, "I'm the one who makes the decisions right now," but Fengshen responded first. "Your Highness, you'll be noticed for sure if you take His Majesty to a doctor in the city." Shilian instantly froze. The queen spoke up. "That's what we were afraid of, which is why we didn't say anything over the past few days. My son, don't you just think of a way to bring Why don't you just think of a way to bring back some medicine? The king started coughing violently again, and the queen went into the back room to look after him. Julian was dazed for a good moment, then he turned and went into another room. Your Highness, what will you do? Fengshen called out. Julian didn't answer. He just started rummaging through all the shelves and chests in the cottage. What are you looking for? Fengshen asked. Julian didn't respond. A moment later, he dug out something from the bottom of the chest, an ancient sword. When he saw what Julian had retrieved, Fengshen asked, What are you doing with Hongyujin? Julian was quiet for a long moment before he replied, I'm going to pawn it. You can't, Fengshen cried in shock. Julian slammed the chest shut heavily. I've already pawned so many swords. This is just one more. By this point, he had pawned over half of his beloved swords collection to make enough money for the carriage and bribes at checkpoints they needed for their journey. And since they couldn't go inside a large, bustling pawn shop, they sometimes wound up blackmailed by shady merchants who had determined their identities and were forced to sell at a pitiful bargain. It's not the same, Fengshen exclaimed. Don't you really like that sword? Otherwise, why wouldn't you have pawned it already instead of stuffing it at the bottom of a chest? And the Emperor gave it to you. It won't sound good if a sword gets out. If word gets out. No matter how much I like it, it's not as important as a life, Julian said wearily. Let's just go. The two made their way to the city with the sword, both looking downtrodden. When they arrived at the pawn shop, Julian stopped and glanced at Hongyujin in his hand. Fengshen peered at him. Why don't we forget about pawning it? Let's try to think of another way. Julian shook his head. It's too late. Besides, we don't know if there is any other way any way that'll get us enough money. No mortal would be a match for them if they stole, snatched, or employed their others' trickery, and money would pour in much faster, but things were so difficult precisely because they had to uphold their mortal compasses and adhere to the ethics of mortals, earning their money honestly. Having made up his mind, Julian said, This has to be pawned. Once it's done, we'll go buy medicine. Despite his words, his feet still didn't move. Fengshen knew he was reluctant to let go. This was Julian's last sword, so he said, Let's look around some more. Suddenly, a clamor erupted on one end of the street. They were shouting and yelling. Someone cried out, Who's causing trouble? The audacity! Catch him! Catch him! The two were startled, and Julian instantly ducked to the side of the road in alarm. Who? Fengshen cautiously went over to check, returning only after he was sure of their safety. It's nothing. Don't worry. It has nothing to do with us. It's not Yong'an soldiers or anyone who's looking for us. Only then did Julian's tension ease. What's going on? I'm not sure, Fengshen said. It looks like a fight between some irate servants. Want to go see? Let's go, Julian said. Hopefully it's not some local tyrant. The two went over to watch. They saw two men brawling in the corner of a crowd of onlookers, and the audience was cheering. Fengshen tapped the shoulder of a passerby who was enjoying the show. Hey, buddy, what's going on here? A passerby chuckled. You don't know? This is too exciting. The servant is beating the master. What an affair. Julian was speechless. How come? And why the cheering? Of course we're going to cheer, the passerby said. That master is no good. His servants followed him since he was young, and were very loyal, but the master only knew how to exploit him. He paid him badly and worked him to the bone, pushing him around all day. The servants couldn't take it anymore, and so you see, now they're fighting. And so you see, now they're fighting. Sure enough, the one was throwing all the punches and was cursing as he was yelling accusations and declarations like, I've had it with you for ages. Why don't you think about what you've really given me? My family's so poor that we can barely eat, but you still lord over me, acting all high and mighty. From today onward, I ain't your dog no more. The master was hugging his head and screaming as he was beaten, all while the crowd was cheering. Their shouts made Shilian's heart lurch in waves, and chills shook over his body. He unconsciously stole a glance at Fengshen. Fengshen didn't notice his strange behavior at all, and when he heard those terrible deeds, he commented offhandedly, "I see. Then the master really is no good. No wonder the servant is rebelling." He didn't mean anything by it, but Shilian's heart dropped, and he gripped Hong Yijen tighter. After much headache, Hong Yijen was pawned, and the two finally had money. They immediately went to find a doctor and purchased dozens of different medicinal herbs to take back. Medicinal herbs used to treat illnesses that made one cough up blood were expensive and needed to be bought out in large quantities. It wasn't a matter of one or two doses over a couple of days, and they would need to keep close watch on his father to respond to how his father responded to the treatment. That evening, Fengshen unwrapped a few packages of herbs and started boiling down the medicine outside of the cottage, fanning widely at the flames with a thorn cattail leaf fan. As for Shilian, he was once again rummaging through the shelves and chests all over the house. After a while, he finally fumbled out a soft, shimmering golden belt. Shilian originally had several golden belts, but they had met the same end as the swords, all pawned off aside from the last one. Shilian had wanted to keep it as a souvenir, but today he decided to use it for something else. Fengshen happened to look up at him just then. "Your Highness, what are you doing with that belt? You're not thinking of pawning it, are you? Of pawning it too, are you?" Shilian walked over and handed the golden belt to him. Fengshen's eyes bulged into bewilderment. What are you doing giving this to me? Your Highness, did you actually lock your brain inside of that shut chest just now? Shilian was briefly speechless until he remembered the gift of the golden belt had a special meaning in the upper court, and his expression instantly darkened. "You're overthinking it. I don't mean it in that way. Just take it as its ordinary gold." He shoved it on him, and Fengshen glared back, shimmering golden belt draped around his shoulders. "No, you still gotta tell me why you're stuffing me with gold out of nowhere." "Just take it as long as you pay," Shilian said. Fengshen was confused. "No, but what's with you all of a sudden? Why are you talking about pay at a time like this? You'd be better off pawning it to buy some medicine for His Majesty. Or it's fine if you don't pawn it. Keep it to yourself. The belt is something only a heavenly official can own." At the mention of medicine, Shilian looked back towards the cottage. There was where the king and queen were resting. "I can think of other ways to get medicine," he replied, "so just take it." Shilian was determined to give, and Fengshen couldn't understand why. Although he was confused, he found it kind of funny for some reason. He shrugged and picked up the ragged fan and continued to fan the flames to boil down the medicine solution. "Fine then. I'll keep it for you for now. Whenever you want it back, just let me know." Shilian shook his head. "I won't ask for it back. You can do with it as you will." Their pockets were a little fuller after pawning Hong Yijen, and they finally managed to have a good few meals. Since the queen's skills were so shocking, Shilian stated that he would take over the chores of cooking and politely asked his mother to look after his father and absolutely not enter the kitchen. Shilian didn't have much experience, but it was as the saying went. Even if he'd never eaten pig trotters, he'd seen pigs walk. His creations were mostly edibles, so the party was saved from further dietary issues. After he fought with the king that day, Shilian regretted what he'd said, but he couldn't swallow his pride. Instead, he silently did his utmost to care for him. A patient who was coughing up blood couldn't be afforded to suffer any cold, so he got more blankets and small heaters for him. The Yong'an soldiers were cracking down hard in their attempts to catch the escaped Shinla royalty, and as soon as the city also heightened its security, they had finally settled in. But now they had to leave again. Shilian had already lost count of how many cities they had passed while on the run with his parents in tow. and to be honest, everything they had seen on the road was much more peaceful than he had initially imagined. The only city that met a tragic fate was the royal capital of Shenla. Nowhere else seemed to have been affected that severely. After all, the king, the crown prince, and the royal capital. After all, the king, the crown prince, the royal capital, the nobility, all were extremely remote concepts to regular civilians. The change in ruler didn't seem like it made much difference, especially since the king wasn't a tyrant and hadn't passed any particular strict decrees after he ascended to the throne. There were no further lamentations, and the matter was simply a new topic for lively after-dinner conversations. I worked this plot of land when the king was named I still work the same plot of land now, and the king is named Lang, Shilian heard someone say, and they weren't wrong, but strangely everyone's feelings were oddly unified. When it came to the storied crown prince who went from invincible to losing every battle, it was as though they suddenly become hardcore Shinla patriots whenever his name was mentioned. This puzzled him and also made him resentful. However, he really didn't have much energy to worry about these things anymore. The money they made from pawning Hongyi Jin only lasted a few short months. An illness that made you cough up blood was already difficult to cure, and on top of that, the king was depressed. He needs large amounts of medicine just to maintain a passable health, and his condition would no doubt worsen considerably if the supply were cut off. Shilian had nothing left to pawn, and today he thought, and they loitered on the streets before finally turning to Fengshen. "Why don't we give it a try?" Fengshen peered at him. "I guess we could give it a try." It wasn't the first time they had hesitantly suggested they'd give it a try, but they hadn't ever actually done it before now. Besides, the king had once overheard them while they were discussing the topic and had flown into a rage and thrown a huge fit. He was adamant that Shilian not do anything so shameful for money, otherwise he would refuse to drink his medicine. In the end, they had to abandon the idea, but now they were in a dire situation. But now that they were in dire straits, there was no need to spell it out. They understood each other. Shilian nodded and wrapped his white silk band around his face. "Your Highness, you don't have to do it. I could do it alone," Fengshen said. "That way it'll be fine if the king asks." Then he inhaled deeply, held his breath for a moment, and bellowed at the pedestrians. Dear folks on the street, don't miss out on this." The pedestrians jumped in surprise, and they had all gathered around, chattering. "What's with the yelling? What are you guys up to? What are you guys going to show us?" "I want to see you shatter boulders on your chest." Fengshen removed the bow from his back and began bald-faced bluffing. My nickname is Wonder Archer. I can shoot a bullseye from 100 paces away. I will show off my embarrassing skill for everyone to see. If you enjoy the show, please grant me some coins. Wonder Archer, embarrassing skill. Those were phrases he had picked up from watching street performers. While they had kept saying that they never busk, they had long been observing how others did it without realizing. "Stop wasting your breath. Get on with it," hollered the crowd. We've been waiting. Hurry up." Fengshen knocked the arrow against his bow and pointed at an idle man in the crowd who was munching on fruit. "Will this uncle please step out? Place that apple on your head, and I'll shoot it perfectly from 300 paces away." The idler shrank his neck back and withdrew into the crowd. I'm not doing it." "I won't hit you, don't worry," Fengshen exclaimed. "If I shoot you by accident, I'll compensate you." I'm no fool. If you shoot me by accident, it won't matter how much you pay me, the idler yelled back. Since you're not out here to perform, don't you got your own equipment or something? Since you're out here to perform, don't you got your own equipment or something? Shouldn't you be shooting at the one next to you? The crowd exclaimed, yeah. Let me, Shilian also said. Someone from the crowd tossed over a fruit. Shilian caught it, ready to balance it on his head. However, Fengshen planned to let Shilian get... However, Fengshen never planned to let Shilian get involved, so why would he allow this? In a moment of panic, he snatched the fruit and ate it in a blink of an eye, then changed the direction of his arrow to target a banner hanging high from a tall building. I'll shoot that, he cried, and he did. He was an extremely skilled archer, so of course he hit the target, and the audience cheered and laughed. Well, dang, you do got it. They laughed and chattered amongst themselves, and some really did toss a few coins. The small, round coins tumbled and rolled across the ground, and Fengshen went over and gathered them. Shilian silently crouched down to help. He felt a little depressed, like he'd lost something. Fengshen had once been a servant of the crown prince. Even ministers had been compelled to be courteous and polite when they saw him, never mind the common folk. Some had even tried to curry his favor, heeding and hollering ringleaders when they hauled rocks and earth. Heeding and hollering ringleaders when they hauled rocks and earth had been depressing enough, and now they had to endure being watched and like performing monkeys. Fengshen's sharpshooter skill wasn't being used to kill enemies in battle, but rather to entertain the masses. Just thinking of it made Shilian's stomach turn. Suddenly, a woman's voice rang out. Who's shooting arrows in the streets? Shilian's heart jumped to his throat. Everyone in the crowd turned to pointed at Fengshen. It's him! Fengshen was confused, and the crowd parted as several women came and stomped over, holding an arrow. One of them, the one he had shot earlier, the woman surrounded him. You damned brat! Did you shoot this? What guts? Randomly shooting off weapons in broad daylight? You destroyed the screen in our yard. Tell me, how are you going to pay for this? Yeah, you scared away so many of our patrons. As it turned out, Fengshen's shot was so powerful that the arrow had flown all the way into someone's yard. Fengshen didn't like interacting with women to begin with, and these ladies were caked up with heavy makeup. The perfume powder assaulted his nose and suffocated him. They probably came from a place of ill repute. And their accusations had him waving his hands and backing away. Shilian hurried over to stand in front of him. I'm sorry, he didn't mean to. As for the compensation, we'll think of something. The women's tempers flared, and they began to shove him. And who are you? You... The white bandages covering Shilian's face had slipped from all the pushing and pulling. The women saw his face, and their eyes lit up, and their tones took a kittenish turn. Oh my gosh, what a handsome little gaga. Shilian was confused. One of the women clapped once, her face blooming into a wide smile. Very well, then. It's decided. You're together, right? We'll take you as payment. Shilian was even more confused. Before he realized what had happened, the woman had already dragged Shilian away to a rather lavish establishment. When he looked up, he could see the women on the upper balconies dressed like blossoming flowers and chirping like birds. Only then did Shilian realize that he had been taken away to by a bunch of brothel madams. Goosebumps instantly raised on his skin. Wait, I don't have money. I really don't have any money. The brothel madams chuckled. Of course you've got no money. That's why we're bringing you in to earn some. Shilian was flummoxed. Sorry, but I'm a man, he exclaimed. We know you're a man. We're not blind, the brothel madams replied, annoyed. Fengshen finally broke through the sea of people surrounding him and rushed over, shouting, Let go of him this instant. The two were in a horrid predicament and promptly bolted. They knew they were in the wrong, so they didn't dare fight back. The enraged brothel madams called over The enraged brothel madams called over 30 hired goons, and the duo had to scurry all over the city to escape their pursuit. They had never been involved in a situation like this before and would never dare visit that area again. All the same, the experience confirmed from them that busking was a viable way of earning money, so they found a new location and set up shop. They were fresh faces, and so the locals were very interested, and Feng Xin was a strapping, honest-looking, rather handsome man. They managed to earn a small fortune in those few days, and that paid for their food and medication for at least half a month. But good things didn't last, and it took less than half a month for someone to come knocking. That day, several beefy men came looking for them while Shilian and Feng Xin were packing up. Suspecting that they were Yong'an soldiers, Shilian was alarmed, and inside his sleeves his fists were ready to strike. "Who are you?" he demanded in a low voice. The leader humphed. "You guys have been hanging around our turf for a few days, but you don't know who we are?" Shilian and Feng Xin were both puzzled. Another man spoke up. "You've stolen so much of our business. Don't you think it's rude not to explain yourselves?" The two of them finally understand what was going on. These were other local street performers. The street artists all belonged to a guild or gang, and those groups laid claim to turf. This new duo had shown up, taken all the customers, and stopped them from making any money, so of course the group came looking for trouble. But Shilian and Feng Xin weren't from the streets, so how could they possibly know this particular etiquette? Who'd even want to steal your business if they weren't at the end of their rope? Shilian thought bitterly, but he still spoke courteously. "It's not really stealing, right? People watch what they want to watch. We weren't forcing anyone to gather for our shooting performance." As if these people would listen. "Not stealing. No one's made any money for the past few days. You've taken all the grub," they exclaimed rudely. Bang. The gang members jumped in surprise and saw that Feng Xin had slammed his fist into a nearby wall. There was a giant fist mark there, cracks crawling out from its center. "Are you looking for trouble?" he asked coldly. The gang of beefy men certainly had come to start trouble with their fists, but after witnessing Feng Xin's punch, they had no doubt that his fists were stronger than theirs. Instantly their fire was soothed by half. Still, they refused to let go of this so easily. The leader was briefly stumped, but he quickly changed his tone. "How about this? We'll do this by the book. Let's compare our skills. The winner gets to stay and the loser has to pack up and leave, never to set up shop in this area again." Hearing that it'd be settled with a competition, Feng Xin laughed. Of course he did. How could mortals possibly compete with them? It was sure to win. Shilian also breathed a sigh of relief. "That's exactly what I wanted. How do you want to do this?" "We'll use our best busking tricks," the man proclaimed loudly. The man proclaimed loudly. While he spoke, two other men brought a few rectangular stone slabs of slate, which the man patted. "Shattering boulders on your chest. How about it? Don't you dare? Or do you dare?" Seeing how smug he looked, it seemed it was indeed his specialty. Shilian crouched to touch the slate, then looked up. "It won't be a problem for me, but will it really not be a problem for you?" The stone slabs were the real deal. The man laughed. "Judging by the shape you're in, you'd better just worry about yourself." Feng Xin crouched next to him. Your Highness, let me." Shilian shook his head. "No. You've worked hard the past few days. Let me do it this time." He wanted to make an effort too, and so both Shilian and the man lay down on the ground with slate slabs pressing down on their chests. Feng Xin was given a large hammer. He weighed it with his grip and was just about to smash it down when Shilian swiftly spoke up. "Wait." The others were delighted. "What, do you admit defeat? It's not too late for forfeit now. We'll let you go." "No, I just want to add another slab," Shilian said. The mob was shocked by this. "Are you crazy? Didn't you say it yourself? This is a competition," Shilian explained lazily. "There's no difference in skill if we use the same slate apiece. If you use one slate apiece, so how can we compare our abilities?" The street performers looked doubtful. Some thought he'd gone mad, and the others assumed he was bluffing. After much decision, they stacked another stone slate on his chest. After that, Shelian asked them to add another. Now everyone was sure he'd lost his mind, and they added a third slate without further question. Thus, 3 heavy stone slates were stacked on Shelian's chest, a rather terrifying sight. Under the scrutinizing gazes of the crowd, Fengshen raised the large hammer and smashed it down without blinking. The 3 stone slates cracked in multiple clean pieces. Shelian crawled up from the ground amidst cheers. Uninjured and fine, he calmly dusted off his robes while everyone watched with slacked jaws. The leader's face was pale and his expression was dark. Now he should know to back off, right? Shelian thought. He had assumed the other party would concede and never come seeking trouble again, but the man's expression kept changing, and suddenly he gritted his teeth. Add 2 more to me. No, add 3 more. Bro, you can't, the mob explained. This guy must be using some sort of evil spell. You don't have to go along with him. Yeah, he must have faked it. What the fuck? Fengshen exclaimed angrily. You're the ones who lack skill, but you turn around and accuse us of cheating with evil spells? The leader said in a booming voice, The stone slabs and the hammer belong to us. How could we not know about it if there was some evil spell in play? This brat does have some skills, but 3 slates is nothing. I can do 4. As long as we win, they'll have to leave. That's impossible. Give up, Fengshen said. Don't throw your life away over this. But the man was bullheaded and forced the others to sack 4 staggering heavy stone slates on his chest. You just watch. Shelian could tell that things were going away. Array. Fengshen, we should stop it. Should we stop this? There's no way a mortal can manage 4 slates, he whispered. Let's watch, I guess. I'm sure he's not looking to die. After a couple smashes, he should know to back off, Fengshen whispered back. Shelian frowned slightly and nodded, deciding to wait and see. Sure enough, the man's face changed a moment. The lackey who wielded the hammer gave a single apprehensive knock. The lackey immediately stopped, not daring to move again. But the man yelled, Harder! Did you forget to eat? Harder! Did you forget to eat? Why is your smash so pathetic? The lackey didn't dare to be sloppy on the second one as he used all his strength. Bang! With a loud sound, the man's face turned bright red and he was holding back a large mouthful of blood. This didn't look good, and Shelian and Fengshen quickly called out, Wait, don't force yourself. Who's forcing himself? This is my specialty, the man yelled. Just watch. I'll make you admit defeat. Continue. With a distraught expression, the lackey smashed again. Now he'd done it. The man sputtered blood all over the ground, scaring the lackey into dropping the hammer. The mob rushed out. Let go, bro. If those 2 bastards want to cling on to this place, then let them. Your life is more important. Veins popped on the man's forehead and blood foamed at his mouth. I won't let this go. It's been days since we've had a bite to eat. This is our livelihood's gone if this keeps up. Continue. I refuse to believe I can't compete with that delicate-looking little brat. This is my specialty. Shelian couldn't watch it anymore and spoke up. That's enough. If that's how it is, I concede defeat. Starting tomorrow, we won't come here anymore. Come on, Fengshen. Then he turned to leave, and Fengshen followed him. Behind them, the mob cheered. Your Highness, we're going to give up this place just like that? They had finally found a way to earn money, but now they had to abandon it. Shelian sighed. There's no other way. He's already suffered a massive internal injuries just from a few rounds. I fear he's nearly crippled. Someone's going to die if we keep competing. If we kept the competition going, and we couldn't have been able to stay if that happened either. Fengshen scratched his head and cursed. Suicidal. Honestly. We're never gonna try. We're all trying to make a living, Shelian said simply. Shelian felt rather guilty. He had known the man would force himself to take 4 slabs. Had he known the man would force himself to take on 4 slabs, he wouldn't have asked them to stack 3. He would have just admitted defeat early. Although the man was boorish and reckless, he still had some respectable qualities. Besides, we don't have to busk here. That'd be putting all our eggs in one basket, Shelian said. However, when they returned to their hiding place that night, the queen informed him, with a face full of worry, that the king's symptoms were worsening. He'd need a good long rest and might not be able to endure any more moving, and that meant that they couldn't leave the city for a long time, for the time being. Shilian rummaged through the shelves and chests again, but couldn't find anything to pawn, so he sat next to the chest and spaced out. Fangshan was boiling down medicine, humming as he did so. He hummed and hummed, sounding more and more off-key, and Shilian didn't care to pay attention at first. He eventually couldn't ignore it. "What's with you? In a good mood?" Fangshan looked up. "Huh? No." Shilian didn't believe him. "Really?" In the few days since they had started performing on the streets, Shilian had noticed Fangshan acting a bit strange. Sometimes he'd grin like a fool for no reason. Sometimes he'd suddenly seem troubled. Shilian and Fangshan rarely left each other's side when Mooching had been around. But after Mooching left, Fangshan would sometimes have to deliver food for the king and queen or run other errands. He'd be gone for a while on those days. Shilian assumed that Fangshan must have stumbled upon something while he was out and about, but he didn't have the energy to concern himself with it any further. Eyeing the medicinal pot in front of Fangshan, Shilian was quiet for a long while before he asked, "Is that the last packet?" Fangshan flipped through the bundles on the ground. "It is. If we don't go tomorrow..." Upon remembering that the king was inside the cottage, they couldn't allow him to overhear. Fangshan lowered his voice. If we don't busk tomorrow, what'll we do?" Shilian was silent for a long time, then he abruptly stood up. "Stay here and guard the cottage. I'll go out and think of something." Fangshan was doubtful. "Where are you going? What could you possibly come up with?" Shilian left without looking back. "Don't worry about it, and don't follow me." And that is chapter 96.